Tonight to Golang Melbourne Meetup. I'm not sure if there's a few people who might remember me from before, but I run the Sydney Golang Meetups, have done for about 7 years. And I've also now kick-started Women Who Go in Sydney again, and also about to start Women Who Go Melbourne, which is really exciting, and really, really happy to be here. So, flown in from Sydney yesterday. And before we begin, I actually just want to say that I want to acknowledge our country right now. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So there's a lot going on in the Go world right now, by the way, in case you didn't know. And yeah, actually it's funny because Mirjam, our first speaker, she spoke for us in Golang Sid at the last Go meetup, and really thrilled that she was able to fly here today to speak for you guys today. So yeah, really excited for that. I'd like to say thank you so much for Mark, who's helped us make this happen here at the Mantel Group, Digio. Thank you very much for Digio for hosting. And I hope you enjoyed the pizza. And also I'd like to introduce you to Leah, who's at the back there, who's also one of our organisers. If anyone has any ideas, suggestions, anything that they would like to hear moving forward in future meetups, please come and speak to either myself or Leah. So yeah, I'm going to kickstart with our speakers tonight. So obviously we have Mirjam, who's going to be starting, talking about mocking and Go with Testify. And then we're going to have a little bit of a break. I'm not sure if there's pizza left. I'm not sure. I haven't seen. I haven't actually had some myself yet, but that'll be a chance to grab some if you haven't. 10-minute break, and then we're going to have Arjen, who's also from Mantel Group, who's going to be speaking on how to make life easier, more colourful, and filled with emojis. Interesting. Okay, that's enough from me. Enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Mockery. I gave this talk a few weeks back in Sydney, and it sparked some interesting conversations and some cool talks later on, so looking forward to having those conversations with you, maybe at a beer later on in a pub. Quickly about myself, my name is Mirjam. I'm a software developer at Digio. My career path is very similar to what you probably hear more often these days, which is that I'm a self-taught software developer. I actually worked in international relations before this, but then during lockdowns got really, really bored, started playing around with code, really fell in love with it, and then got the awesome opportunity to start as a software trainee here at Digio in 2021. And that was actually the first time I touched Go and started working with it, and I really fell in love with it. It was such a change from Python, but for the better. And I've been on 2 projects with clients, all in Go. I now help teach one of the Go trainings we do at Mantel. So it's been a torrid love affair. And I'm hoping to share some of that passion with you today. And that came out really bad. Let's continue. So I'm going to be talking about mocking. My goal with this talk was kind of to have something for everyone, right? I know that there's a very diverse crowd that comes to meetups like this. Some of you might be new to development in general or new to Go. Some of you might be really experienced and like absolute experts with Testify and Mockery. I'm hoping that no matter where you are in your journey, there will be something that you can take away from this today. So that's my goal, and with that in mind, I'm going to start at the basics, and I'm going to have a quick talk with you about why do we mock, and what is mocking. I'm also going to look at manual mocking in Go, because that might be something that you guys already do all the time, or something you've never seen before because you always use tools. In either case, we should talk about it. Then I'm going to introduce the library that my talk is focused on today, which is Testify and Mockery. Then I'm going to do a live demo to show you how to use it, so let's hope that goes well. Then we'll talk about Testify Mockery versus GoMock, which is the other very popular mocking library out there. And finally, we'll have a look into the future to get you all excited about what's coming up with Testify and Mockery. And you might be wondering, why are we spending any time on GoMock? The reason for that is that the first time I touched Testify and Mockery was a year and a half ago. And there was like this one thing about it that in the API that just made me really hate it. Like I did not want to use it. I thought it was really cumbersome. And so I just scratched it off, used GoMock. GoMock has a beautiful API. Everything's wonderful. I went with that. And I actually wrote this entire presentation using GoMock. And at the very end, I was like, oh, I should look at other libraries and just give a comparison about why GoMock is so superior. Had a look at Testify, Mockery, and realized that they've been busy, and there have been a lot of updates over the last years, and one of them honestly changed Testify to go from here to up there, and I am not really seeing any reason to use GoMock anymore with that update there. And I was so convinced of that, I went back and I rewrote this entire presentation, and now I'm hoping that I'll convince you of that as well. Okay, so let's start at the basics. Did I bring my water, or did I leave it over? Oh, I'm sorry, can I have it? Thank you. So let's start with the basics. Why do we mock? Okay, so here we have a definition. Mocking is to isolate the behavior of the component being tested, so we need to simulate, aka mock, the behavior of its dependencies. So it's a lot of words, let's break it down. So this here is an abstraction of or it is actually the service I'm going to be using today to do my live demonstration. It's a very simplified service, right? Just to keep it focused. So let's say we have an API layer, and it has a new booking handler. So you make a request that you want to create a booking. The handler takes it, moves it to the booking layer. The booking layer then creates the booking functionality, and then it calls a downstream service, the payment layer, and asks it to process the payment. And it might be calling a other service to process the payment or do whatever. That's all downstream. So what we want to focus today on is the booking layer. We want to do a unit test on the booking layer. And in order to do so, I need to control all the components around it. I need to control what's going into it, and I need to control what the downstream service, the payment service, the payment layer is telling it. So I can make sure that inside we are actually processing errors or other cases as we intend them to be processed. That means I don't need to worry about the API layer, because I'm going to be calling the booking layer directly with the values that I want to give to it in that test case. And I need to replace the payment layer with a mocked payment layer, where I am in control of what it returns. And that's what mocking is all about. Okay, so let's have a quick look at manual mocking. So mocking all starts with the interface. Interfaces in Go are implicit, meaning they define functions, and then any struct that implements these functions is a member of that interface, fulfills that interface. So here we have the payer interface, which has the function process payment, takes a payment, returns a payment state and an error. So now if I want to mock something that fulfills this interface, I could have, for example, this mock payment service implementation. And it has a payment state and has an error. And here's the function we just talked about, process payment, takes a payment, and returns a payment state and an error. So as you can see, this is the same as this, ergo this implements the payer interface. And so I can now set it up as long as the function signature looks the same, I can control what's happening inside. So my mocked payment service has a payment state and an error as its fields, which I decide on what they are when I set it up. And then when process payment is called in my test, I'm telling it to return the payment state and the error that I set up before. So this is a very simple mock. You can make it as complex as you want to. I could assert that whatever is passed in, that the payment object or struct being passed in has exactly the values and the fields that I want it to have. I could do a bunch more interesting stuff in there, but this is a very basic manual mock. So why should we use them? Well, there's two very big pros to them. They give you full control and full flexibility because you're making them, right? So you just say, fulfill this interface and everything else you can decide on, and you can make it as complex as you need it to be. So that's great. However, I see a lot of downsides with manual mocking. The biggest one is the development and maintenance is time consuming. So development being time consuming kind of depends on how familiar you are with Go, how comfortable you are, right? If you're a new developer, mocking might be a really abstract concept to you. And so to understand what a mock is supposed to do might take you a while, take it from me. But if you're more experienced, development might be really quick. You're like, I know how mocks work, I know what I want to do. Easy peasy, I can assert what kind of type is being passed in and give it functions to execute, sure. But no matter how good you are, maintenance is going to stay time consuming. Because every time you change your interface, and as we know, a project develops, requirements change, you might think, oh, what was I thinking 6 months ago? And have to rework it all. every time you change the interface, you don't only have to change your definition of it, you have to change the mock, so it actually still fulfills the interface. And that's just time-consuming, tedious, and it doesn't add much value. So with generating mocks, you don't have to do that. You just click a button and is done for you. The other problem is that it causes inconsistencies between tests, and even between developers and even between tests of one developer. Because if you're not giving people guardrails, you're just letting them do whatever, then people are going to do exactly the thing they need in that case. And then for the next case, they're going to do exactly that, what they need for here. And then every test is going to look really different. And the beautiful thing about testing in Go is you can auto-generate all these table tests, and you can make them look really neat and uniform, and then it's so easy to see what are you actually testing in a test case. And you want to keep it that way. So if you let people give them too much rein, they're going to do whatever they want. So I don't think that's a good thing. And finally, manual mocks are only as good as you make them, right? So as I showed you, the one I just did was a valid mock, but it didn't do much, did it? It didn't validate much. So it's only as good as you make it, as much experience as you have, as much time as you want to spend on it. And finally, there might be unexpected bugs, right? People are implementing something. Wouldn't it be frustrating if you're trying to debug a test and it keeps failing and you don't understand what's happening and then it turns out that the mock is wrong? So that's the sort of thing you want to avoid. So with that, all that being said, I want to talk about Testify and Mockery. What is it and why do we love it? Many of you who work with Go probably already know Testify. Testify provides a set of tools for making testing simpler, quicker, and easily debuggable for easy-to-read test phase descriptions. As you can tell, I took that from their GitHub page. It's a good library, right? If you write a test case and you have Testify, it's going to give you really good error output. It's going to help you debug things much quicker, so that's nice. It has 4 big features. The biggest one being the assert and require package, which basically allows you to assert that a test does this and that, and then it gives you good output if it didn't do that and lets you know what went wrong. Require is the same, it just fails your test immediately instead of keeping going and just telling you at the end. The suit package, I don't have much experience with myself, but from what I understand, it's very similar to how you do tests in Java, where you set up a test suite, and then you tear it down at the end. It's good for working with databases, for example, testing databases. And finally, we have the mock package, which we'll be talking about. And so this is just Testify. Testify you can use without Mockery, right? It's just a really good testing library. Mockery is the actual tool you use to generate the mocks you are using, and it was designed with the intention of being used with Testify. You could just use one or the other, but ideally use them together when mocking. Cool, so why should we use it? I've said a few of these things already. So it's integrated with the Go testing framework. It has a very simple API, ever since this 2.10 update I'll be talking about. Quick setup, and the auto-generated mocks are easy to create, and they're easy to maintain. Every time you change the interface, you just regenerate the mocks, you're done. The cons are there's a learning curve. Of course there is, you're using a tool, right? Fine-tuning is only possible to a certain degree because you are using auto-generated structs. You shouldn't modify an auto-generated file. So you can only fine-tune it so much. There's really only so much you can do that they allow you to do, which is a lot, though. We'll be talking about that. And finally, complex cases require in-depth knowledge of the library. So I ran into a case with my client where I was trying to mock this one very specific case, and I needed something to happen. And I just could not figure out how to do it with GoMock, which is what I was using at my clients. And in the end, I just had to write my own mocks to make it work. So, you might run into that with Testify Mockery as well, of course. Good news being, I did figure out how to do it with Testify Mockery, and I'll show you how. So at least that specific case you'll be able to solve. Okay, we're already at the live demo. So while I set it up, yes, give a quick prayer for me, please. Let's hope this goes well. Let me also get out my cheat sheet so you don't have to watch me code too much. Okay, cool. So this is the repository I was talking about. So we have a booking processing module, which is our booking service. Our booking service has as a field the payment service. And then we have here very basic create booking. It takes a booking struct, returns an error if something goes wrong. It will validate the booking, when it comes in. Then we create the payment payload, which means that we calculate the total price, and we give it a method, which is handed to us from the booking. And then we already call payment service. Oof, this is a bit annoying to use. Here we go. Payment service, and then we call process payment. And then if the error returned is not nil, we return the error, and if the state is anything but payment succeeded, we also return our own version of the error. Very basic. What does the payment service do? Payment service is held very simple. Magic happens here. We don't really care about that, right? That's what we're mocking out. We don't need to know what happens in there. For this, we just have this payment service here, and it has this function over there. Okay, so I want to test booking. In order to test, unit test this booking, create booking function, I need to mock this out because I need to be in control what state and what error is returned in each test case. So how do I do that? Because it is a field here. Well, that's where my first revelation came in. That's what interfaces are for. Ah, okay, so let's do an interface. Let's wrap this. Here we go. Okay, now we have the payer interface. It has the function process payment, looks exactly like this function, therefore payment service fulfills the payer interface. You can tell that because there are now green buttons here that like jump around. IDE is helping us. Cool, now I have a payer interface here. Next thing I need to do is instead of actually passing the payment service struct here, because I can't mock that out, that's downstream, I'm not in control of that in my test, I need to pass in the interface, because I can implement a mock that implements that interface, or I can use a mock that implements that interface. So that's step 2. And now we can generate our mocks. So let's do that. So for those of you who've worked with this library before, you've probably seen this command before, but I'll break it down. Okay, so we have here the go generate command, Mockery, which is the tool we're using in order to generate the mocks. And then we tell it the thing we want to mock out is payer. And Mockery is really smart. It's going to check like which file you're in and then actually go there and find that interface and generate a mock for you. So this is how you'll see it used most of the time. But there is a better way. And the better way is this one. It looks a bit more verbose, but it's not scary, I promise. So what we can do is instead of using Mockery, that tool, like that, we say go run, and then we give the address of Mockery, and more importantly, we tie it to a version and tell it payer interface. The point of this is, like I said before, Mockery has updates all the time, right? It's progressed continuously. Let's say that you are generating mocks, and you're using mocks in your tests, which are tied to version 2.20. And then down the line, in a year or so, someone onboards to your project, and then they use this Mockery command up there to generate the mocks because you did not commit them. You want them to do it. And then the version has changed. There's been a major change. There's been maybe even a breaking change. And now suddenly your tests won't work for them, even though they worked for you. So that's something you want to avoid. Ideally, you want to tie it to the version so you exactly know what behavior to expect. And the other big reason to do that is because your CI/CD tool can then pick that up and use it also to generate mocks if you need that to happen. So definitely recommend this approach over the one above. So let's give it a run. I can run it like this. Then we need a bit of patience because Mockery is not the fastest. There we go. Okay. So look at that. It just generated a mocks folder for me. It put it right there. Beautiful. Gave it a name. Didn't have to do any of that. And there we go. Here's my auto-generated code. Don't need to spend much time on it. We know it works. Okay, so let's give it a spin. So I'm going to command N this one and say test for function. Just a few nifty tricks in case you don't use this IDE too much. Great, so here we have our test. I'm just going to do a little bit of work so you don't have to see me type again. So I'm just going to set this up. So this is just my auto-generated tests. I don't want to put... Oh, you're not happy with me, are you? Oh, yeah, thank you. That's the curse. Okay. Can you auto? Thank you. Okay, great. So the first thing I want to do is this is what I want to mock out. This is where I want to call my mock. So I'm going to turn this into a function call. So I can, for each test case, return the version of payer that I need. And so here I'm also going to make this a function call. There we go. And then I'm going to write my first test case. And I'm going to cheat a little because I don't want to type it all out again. So I'm just going to get the test case here. And then I'm going to walk through it with you. So, okay. So, let's do a success case. Success, payment was successful. You don't need to worry about most of the things, like this is just the stuff I implemented at the bottom. But this is the bit we care about. Okay, so we here have the function call that I set up here. Needed to return the payer interface. And that means that I can now create the new payer mock, which is just, that's how you do it in Mockery. And then I can tell it, I want you to mock out the function process payment. This is really annoying, but bear with me. So as the first parameter, I give it in quotation marks, process payment, the name of the function I want to mock out. And then as the second parameter, I give it the actual parameters I want passed to it, which is get valid payload, just return something there. And then I tell it, return for me payment succeeded, that's the state, and no error. That's the syntax here, and then I need to return it, and because the mock fulfills the payer interface, it won't cause a fuss. And then down here in my test case, booking service is set up with the field, which is filled with this mock we just set up, and then that is being used actually in create booking when we call it. And we say we don't want an error to be returned, because that is our success case. And it'll work. Great. So that's how we use Mockery. It's pretty straightforward. But of course, we can make it more interesting, because I just complained to you about this here. This is the gripe why I thought Mockery was not worth it. Because I don't know how it is for you, but for example, on the project I'm in the store package, we have 20, 25 functions in one interface, and each one of them is really like such a long name, because we have to describe exactly the case we're doing there with the database. And I don't want to type that out every time, and it's also not intuitive. That's the first parameter, and then the second parameter is my actual first parameter to the function. I don't like it. I don't think it's a good API. But there has been an update. So let's go back to here, and let's do this again, but let's add a little flag. And this is the new thing. We now have the flag with expector equals true. And that'll make it pretty much have the same API as GoMock. So we regenerate, nice thing, I don't have to delete anything. We look back here, we now have this. This is new. Okay, let me go back to my booking test. The first thing we need to note, come, you know what it is, yep. The first thing we need to notice, nothing breaks. It still works, everything's good, but I can now do a better thing, which is PS dot expect dot, and then process payment shows up. It didn't do that before. That's because of the expect flag. And now process payment, I can give it the valid payload and say return payment succeeded, nil. And I think that looks so much cleaner. That actually looks like the function call I'm mocking out. And it'll still pass. Awesome stuff. Okay, cool. So now I think the API is just as beautiful as the GoMock API. Honestly, that makes such a difference. And the error handling, if you run into an error, something's not behaving as you expect it to, or you set up your test case wrong, it'll be so much cleaner than it is with GoMock. That's one of the big downsides of GoMock, and I'll show you a comparison later on. It's so ugly when it tells you something's wrong, and you need to go look for it. And with Testify, you don't. Okay, I'm going to add one more test case, just so you see a little more of it, because I want to show you an error test case. Okay. So again, we did the same thing. We have process payment, and now the only thing I've changed is returned. I'm now saying give me failed, but no error, which is one of my error cases if you remember from before. I'm telling him I want an error this time around. I run the thing, boom. So that's how easy it is to just mock an error or whatever you need to happen. Okay, cool. So now that we've looked at that, let's look at some more advanced use cases. I'm going to stop typing. So in order to show you these advanced cases, I've made complex booking. And complex booking is probably like the stupidest function I've ever written in my life. There's so much happening here, but I just kind of wanted to show you all the things you could do with it. So we're even like working with context timeouts and whatever. It's fun. Okay, so just kind of suspend your disbelief and let me tell you what the business cases are that we're walking through. So the first one is success, payment initiated, so we do another one. Okay, so before we were only calling the function once, but what if we need to call a function multiple times? Then we can add at the very end of this, so this is all the same as before, but now I've added times at the end. And I can put in as many times as I want. It's gonna pass. And that's like gonna make sure that it runs as often. It calls that function as often as you need it to. So if I changed it to, for example, to 1, it would throw an error and say, this method has been called over 1 times. You said once, but it was over that, which I think is a very helpful error. Thank you. And if I give it 3, a bit less helpful, but it still says, the code you are testing needs to make 1 more call. Great. So that's how this one works. Then you can also kind of say, different kind of functions. Let's say, so what my code does, if you call process payment and it returns failed, we're going to call refund payment. And then we're going to call process payment again. So what I did here is I said process payment, call it twice. You can also do that, not times, not an integer. And then refund payment, call once. And it'll pass. Great. But the thing here is, I just told you, I'm calling in my actual code process payment, then refund payment, then process payment. But Testify did not care about that. It just said it was called that amount of times. I don't care about the order. It's fine for me. So if you actually care about the order and you want to make sure things are called in a certain order, you can do that too. So if you go down here, and this is ugly. So what you need to do is you need to add once to your process payment and then assign it to a variable. And then you call refund payment and tell it to not be called before call 1, assign that to call 2, and then call process payment again and tell it to not be called before call 2. And that will now actually ensure or check if things are called in the order you just told it to. Glad to hear it. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're saying payment failed, so we try to refund it, but time runs out, so we turn into error. So this is where I use context timeout. So let's say you are trying to hit an endpoint, and you're giving it a timeout. You're saying, if after 5 seconds I've not made a successful call, return an error. Give up, it's fine. We can test that as well. And this is where after comes in. Okay, so I was saying, if call refund payment, and if refund payment doesn't give me a response within 5 seconds, I want you to terminate and return an error. And so in my mock, I'm telling it that I want it to only return after 6 seconds, and I want an error. Okay? So let's see. Are we ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Great, we got the error. So this is a good one. This can be quite good in certain cases, but don't overuse it. As you saw, it took 6 seconds to run the test. So if you're going to do this a lot everywhere, you're not going to have a very performant testing setup. But yeah, you can check that one. Okay, we have 2 more to go. So this is a fun one. Success, payment state unknown. We let payer fill out the reason why. So in this case, I'm saying process payment. Process payment will return for me payment unknown. And then I'm going to, this is what business wanted me to do. I'm going to give it a pointer to payment reason, and then it is going to assign to me as the member variable of reason the message of what the reason was. And then we read it. Okay, so this is what we're doing. How do I mock that? How do I mock? I'm giving it a pointer, and then it fills out the pointer for me. That's actually exactly where I got stuck in the business, in my actual client that I was telling you about, where I had to do that, because it's not uncommon. For example, if you want to unmarshal a JSON, you will give it a pointer to a struct, and then it unmarshals into that. Or if you work with a database, often you'll give it like a struct, and it does the database call and then puts it into that struct. But it doesn't return it to you. You're giving it a pointer, and then you just use that object that you gave it the pointer to. And you need to be able to mock that. And I couldn't figure out how to do it with GoMock. It's actually quite similar to Mockery, just GoMock's documentation is even worse than Mockery's. So it took me a while to figure out. Here we go. You have this one here, run. And run, you can give a function, you set it up, and then you tell it what to do inside. So I'm saying this function takes pointer to payment reason, and then it takes that pointer and populates message with it's not me, it's not you, it's us. And that's it, it doesn't return anything, right? So return nil. Cool, and I'm printing it in my test case, so we should see this message now. And there we go, it's not you, it's us. Perfect, so that's how you use run and how you can do that sort of case. And then finally, we have run and return, which takes a function, but it actually returns something. So as you might see, update and return reason doesn't have a return. It has run and return, and then it executes the function, which is, again, our message, get the message, and then returns R to us. I don't know why it would, but it does in this case. And get the message. Here it is. Easy peasy. Yep, and that's like more advanced use cases for how you could use Mockery. Awesome stuff. Okay, so let's go back to my presentation. That was a lot. I'm happy to show you stuff a bit slower if you're interested later on. Let's do a quick recap of the 3 most important points. The first one is interfaces. You can use mocks only if they fulfill the interface that you need. So if you need to mock out a function, you need to wrap it in an interface and then use that interface and pass the interface around instead of the actual struct that you're using, so you can replace it with a mock. And if you're a producer, like the library you're using doesn't provide an interface, you can make your own interface and make them fulfill your interface. Just a little tip out there. The second one is use Go generate with expector equals true. That'll make the API so much more useful. And finally, play around with the API. So we've looked at times, we've looked at not before, we've looked at after a certain time, we've looked at run this function, and run and return this function and return this interface to us. So you can test, I think, pretty much anything. There's going to be very few cases where you'll actually have to do your own thing. Cool. Okay, so final point, or no, second to final point, sorry. Testify and Mockery versus GoMock. What made me change my mind? So now I get to just complain a little bit about how I had to go back. Okay, so when it comes to mock generation, it's quite similar between the two. So Mockery Testify has this Go generate, Go run, name payer, throw the expector flag in. GoMock is quite similar. It needs a little bit more information. So you need to tell it where to put the mocks. You can do that with Mockery too. They both provide a bunch of flags, so you can configure it a lot. But you need to tell it where it goes, and you need to tell it where it is, right? So Testify did it for you, which is why it's a bit slower. GoMock you need to tell, and then in the return it's a bit faster in generating the mocks. But there is a bug with GoMock that has driven me insane, which is that since modules have become mandatory in Go, you can't generate mocks anymore. It just keeps failing on you, and then you spend ages reading the internet trying to figure out what's going on. And basically what you need to do is you need to add this build flag, and that'll solve it for you. So that's a free tip. Test setup is very similar. The API is pretty much the same. So we've seen this one where you either pass a string, or with the expector you can just call expect. And GoMock offers this expect right out of the back, which is why it had the better API in the beginning. But apart from that, they are very similar. Asserting order. With asserting order, I think that's where GoMock shines. So Testify does the thing we just talked about, where you have to assign it to a variable and tell it not before that, and then not before that. And I don't like that. The big reason being, tests should be easy to read. I don't want to spend time understanding your test case. I want to see what it is, see if it works, and use it to help me understand the code or make sure there's not a bug. I don't want to spend time looking at the end of the function to see if there's a not before. And GoMock has this beautiful in-order call. And then you just put them in the order that you want them to happen. I don't know why Mockery doesn't have it. So if you are using, or you're working in a repo where the order of your calls is vital, is important, you should use GoMock, because that's going to be so much nicer to use. Personally, in the projects I've been on, it has barely ever mattered. like the very few times it matters, I can do that. Trade-offs. Okay, now we come to the big thing why I like Testify so much more. Return values, the test failure output. So let's say the return value is different than expected. The output is quite similar, so we'll have here the error, receive unexpected error, payment state is free, when we expected it to be 1 in an enum. And here it'll say, create booking error, payment state is free, want error false. I think that's a little more confusing, but more importantly, it's harder to find. This, it's formatted. It jumps out at you. Little difference, but it really saves you time. But in everything else, honestly, Testify is better. So this is a big one that I constantly run into in GoMock, which is where the return value is set up wrong. For example, your function that you're mocking out returns 2 values, but you forget because you're mocking it and you're doing other stuff. And so you just give it 1 return value. And then you'll get this mess here. And then you have to read through all of that and be like, missing calls to process payment. I thought it was called. Why is that happening? You go down the wrong rabbit hole. You look down here and you're like, oh, there was a panic. Whew, that isn't good. And then you go down the wrong hole here. And then finally you're like, oh, wrong number of arguments to return was passed. Got 1, 1, 2. If you find it right away, you're good, but it's still annoying. Look at that. You can't even make that mistake. Testify doesn't allow it. It'll like be right away. It'll say, not enough arguments. Change it now before you go hunting for the bug. If we have an unexpected function call, again, look at that difference. So, what? And then we have unexpected call to process payment. Can't read that, don't know what that is. Because there are no expected calls of the method process payment for that receiver. Gotta find that. Here, I said mock. I don't know what to return because the method call was unexpected. Oh, is that the problem? Either, and it even gives me a solution, either do payment return first or remove the call. So much less thinking. Love it. I could keep going. I won't. I had more slides. I deleted them. You're welcome. Then the other thing, popularity and regularity of updates. They're both really popular libraries. Like, I don't want to talk bad about GoMock. It's been around for a bit longer than Testify. Mockery, it's good. We like it. I've used it in all of my projects, and I've been happy enough. But Mockery Testify has way more updates than GoMock has. GoMock hasn't had anything done to it since June 12, 2021. Mockery gets updates all the time, and I love it, and they even have great documentation, and they get you really excited about it. And Testify hasn't had an update since beginning of 21 either, but we'll get to that. There is something coming. And finally, documentation for both of them is pretty bad. I've had a hard time trying to set things up. I'm hoping this presentation helps with people out there trying to figure out what they need to do, especially just using it with like really nice test cases, unit tests. That's kind of where we're lacking. They're just like, oh, you could like do this very bizarre test case that no one actually wants to do. Testify is a bit better. Oh, sorry, Mockery is a bit better. It actually has some nice documentation. I think the creator of it is just really excited and wants to share it. So that's nice, but they're both me. Yeah. So overall, Testify is pretty great. A look into the future, what's coming next. So Mockery, like I said, creator likes to share what's happening. They have a package-based model. So they're bringing out a package-based model. So they want to load the entire package once instead file by file. So that should really reduce the runtime and simplify the logic. They also want to improve the error reporting. They've been around for a while. They need to upgrade to the modern Golang practices. They also have configuration-driven generation. That's what they want to bring in. So specify mocked package and change settings on granular level in a central YAML file. So that's really cool, right? You'll have a central YAML file, and then you set up all the things. You say, oh, everything is with expector. Now I don't have to type it anymore, and other kinds of flags that you might want, and you can, put on the version that you want used. So that's a really cool concept. They're testing that right now. And they also want to remove the auto-discovery. So it doesn't look anymore in which file you're in and then look for the interface there, and it takes a bunch of time. You'll just tell it. A bit more annoying to type, but it'll really improve the generation of your mocks. And Testify is also working on a version 2. They're very cards to their chest. They're not telling much. I saw an interview with them where they basically talked an hour about nothing. They are bringing out a tighter API and a focus on improving core functionality. That's as much as I could extract. Sounds pretty good though. Testify is an awesome library already. I'm excited to see it. And if you go on their GitHub page, there's actually like a little survey where you can talk about how you use the whole Testify library in general and give them some feedback, and maybe you'll see your suggestions implemented. That'd be pretty cool. Yep, and that's it. Thank you so much for your attention. Do you want this? I think we can switch it over there.
And I think, really, really impressed with your talk. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for?
Of course, Sarah.
You already pointed out that you don't want to do wait, like 6 seconds in your scenario. Is there a way to actually do like a mock timer on top of that you know of? So that you can still run the thing, but you don't wait for 6 seconds.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure how you do that, because what you're actually testing is how your function reacts to having to wait. So I'm not sure how you'd extract that.
I think
Yeah?
you just change the time to wait to be dynamic. So in the test, you say the behavior to wait some milliseconds. And the test the behavior waiting milliseconds.
I'm not 1,000% sure, but I'm happy to look at it later. Like, I have the code right here. We can play around with it. That'd be good.
Thank you. Any other questions, anybody? Oh, okay.
I really enjoy your talk, and I have a small question. So, you said when we go generate Mockery, and we better to specify the version, and why can't we just specify the version in the import? So when we import the package, we specify the version, and then...
That's a really good question, yeah. So the thing is, let me just go back to my code. Somewhere, here we go. So the thing is that here, when we used Mockery, right, where you're like, oh, we could just specify the version of Mockery, right? So we're not actually importing it. Mockery is not being imported here. What we're doing here is we've installed the tool. If you remember, we talked about go install recently, where you actually have like the tool installed, and then the tool executes. And that tool, has a version at the time that you go install it. So you can't specify it up here. You'd have to specify it when you install it, and you can't really give that command. You could put it in the README and tell people which version to install, but people don't read. So I think doing this, you kind of just take out that problem, and you just tell them to go there and run that particular version every time.
Thank you. Any other questions? Was there one over here?
Thank you for the talk. Quick question, do either of these libraries, GoMock or Testify, have any coverage, code coverage?
Like a coverage of your tests?
Yes, of your code.
Oh,
yes.
I don't know if they provide anything extra. When I do coverage, I just like kind of, either run it with the coverage command, or I just do this. And then, oh no, it's not mad. No, it's not happy with me anymore. And then just see what the coverage is that way. I don't know if the tools provide anything further than what's inbuilt. I've changed something. It's mad at me now. I'm sorry. If anyone else has any insight on that? No.
I think the coverage output is done like part of the core load testing stuff.
Yes.
Like the coverage is, or being able to extract coverage is like implicit as part of the fact that it like hooks into the Go testing kind of stuff, which is part of that like early on when it was talking about like it really like the testing.t package stuff. This is just kind of like some layers on top of it that kind of put in some niceness.
Thank you. Okay, I think this might be the last question, and then if anyone has any more, then I'm sure Mirjam won't mind if we catch up afterwards.
Yeah, we can try the time thing.
Yeah, great talk, by the way. I'm a user of GoMock as well, as you know. and you have successfully convinced me to switch to Mockery. So great job there. Yeah. I just have a quick question on the run and do and run function. Does Mockery enforce the function signature, or it just takes a generic function?
It just takes a generic function.
So you can do basically whatever you want there, right?
Yeah, I can just tell it to do whatever, I'm pretty sure. Let's see. It's no, you can't. It's great.
That's a good thing, actually.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a good thing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you, everybody. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to have a 10-minute break now. If you would like to have some more pizza, grab a drink, or if you'd like to use the restrooms, then head towards those doors. And also, we had a really, really good turnout for the after drinks, the last meetup. This is not my neck of the woods, but if anyone knows of anywhere good that you'd like to go afterwards, then come and let me know where we can make it happen. Thank you. Went to a cool place last time. Was it, what was the name of the place that we went last time? Do you remember? I was really impressed because we had like 25 people turn up for after drinks, and you totally outdid Sydney, by the way, just so you know, which was pretty cool. Oh, we're back. Okay, fantastic. Get in there. And will we have lights? Oh, there we go. Well, that was like magic. Okay, enough of me. Here's Arjen. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'll try not to bore you too much after that excellent talk. Anyway, my name is Arjen. I'm a principal consultant at CMD, also an AWS ambassador. I run the AWS user group, an AWS community builder. I talk way too much about AWS. Luckily for you, not tonight. I also organize DevOps Days Melbourne, which we had a great conference for a couple months ago. I hope some of you went. If not, try it again later. Podcasting, writing, and I'm a dad, so actually I don't have time for any of this. Because at home there's a 2-year-old who actually needs me to call her in like half an hour. So I'll make sure to keep this brief enough. You will notice though that there's something missing on that slide. So how many of you are professional Go developers? You do this for your living. Come on. Cool. I'm not. I used to use Go, then I went into the infrastructure side of things. You may have run into some of my code. I contributed a bit to projects like Hugo or Packer. So you may have run some of what I've done, but that was a very, very, very long time ago. Right now, I'm way more to the beginner side of things, trying to maintain things I wrote 7 years ago. So that's one of the things we're talking about today. I'll give a warning though. A lot of this is what I've come to think of as Presto-driven development. What this means is basically I have a lot of ideas for what I want to do. As I mentioned, I don't have time these days. So I look at meetups or conferences or things like that and say, hey, I can submit a talk about the thing I want to do. Then I get to do that talk, but I actually have to build the stuff that I want to talk about. I can guarantee you this is not a great way to build very maintainable, wonderfully structured code. But in the end, it works, at least long enough for a demo, when I'm lucky. So the thing I'm talking about today is something with my wonderful sense of naming I've called Go Output. And that is a module I use for a number of my CLI tools. So while I don't do Go development like professionally anymore, I do like to use it as my language of choice. So when I write a tool to make my life easier, because that's what most of us like to do, right? That's what it's all about. I use this module. So the origins of this code started here by another example of my wonderful naming tool and naming capabilities that I called AWS Tools. I built this, the start of this module. In there, it was how I presented the outputs of that. AWS Tools, it's not really relevant to this talk what it is, but it's basically, it runs a bunch of commands against the AWS APIs and passes the data in things that make it useful for me. That was long before there was such a thing as Go modules, native modules. So those didn't come until Go 1.11, and that was still in preview, beta, whatever mode. And you see a big gap there where I started a new project. This one, I actually thought properly about the name, and called Fog. It's related to CloudFormation. If that doesn't mean anything to you, you're lucky. But obviously, that meant I wanted to use the same code for that. So I did what every self-respecting developer does. I copy-pasted it. Because why would I go to the trouble of abstracting things and stuff like that? Time moved on, and eventually I wanted more. So it became a hassle. We all know when you have the same code in two places, you get to update it in two places, and you run into issues. So I would use one of my tools, and it didn't have what I wanted. And yeah, that constantly happened just when I didn't want it. So eventually I bit the bullet and turned it into a module, where I called it Go Output because I didn't have a better idea for a name. Shortly after, and that was really the trigger, I built something in Fog for making pretty reports. That was really the reason why I decided to put it in its own module, because that made things easier. So as I said, though, what does this actually do? So it prints things. So it prints things out as JSON, YAML, CSV. The reason I star YAML here, remember what I said about pressure-driven development? Last week, as I was developing this talk, I realized I didn't have YAML output, so now it does. Luckily, this was a minor implementation. Some other things it does, it spits out tables in your CLI. It spits out tables or other things in HTML form, in Markdown form. And it spits out diagrams in dot format, draw.io or diagrams.net, whatever name they actually use these days, and Mermaid. Those have some assembly required. We'll go into that in a moment. And on top of all of that, because this is for tools that I use, I don't care about other people, but I want to be happy when I use them. Right? So I want colors, because colors help me see what is important. I want emoji, because they make me happy. And they can make things easier. And then I needed to write to files, append to files. File can be a local file, can be in an S3 bucket, any of that stuff. So what does this then actually look like? So some examples of what I've done. This is some tables that are printed. You see the emojis there for, hey, it was all successful, or in here, you can see this S3 bucket has everything I need, all stuff like this. Of course, as I said, it also prints out JSON. You're welcome. But the more fun part is, of course, the more graphical stuff. So this is other things that it can do. This is what I call the Fog reports. It's basically for CloudFormation deployment, which is infrastructure as code. It shows a timeline of what happened when, how long did things take. It's all pretty nice. Or there we have diagrams that are being drawn. The top one is in dot format, and the bottom one is using draw.io. Now, to be clear though about those diagrams, it doesn't print out this. It prints out what's next to it. And then you push it into your Graphviz or whatever tool you have for converting, and that way it shows up. Same thing really with the draw.io diagrams. Instead of giving you a nice image, what it prints out is that CSV, which you can then import through a very hidden part of the menus under Arrange, Insert, Advanced from CSV. It's a bit annoying, but it works. And as I said, mostly this is built for me. Doesn't mean that it has to only be for me. Everybody can use it. But that means I'm familiar with that, and I usually, when it generates a diagram, I will probably move some things around. So I don't want it as a static image most of the time. So, but enough about this. So here at the programming meetup. So let's talk about how to actually use it. Step one, everybody saw this one coming, didn't they? Step 0, actually. You import the library. Step 1 is create what I call an output array. Basically, you provide some keys, settings, and you're good to go. You then create the actual contents, and that is a map of string interface. The important part there is you need to, the keys have to map the keys that you give it. A lot of this is, like I said, it's developed over many years. There's probably better ways. If you know better ways, please don't hesitate to tell me. And after that, you put it in an output holder and add that. Here I showed some self-restraint while I was preparing the talk. So I saw that and I was wondering, why don't I have that as a single function? But I refrained from making that change before today. I'm very proud of myself for that. And then we write it. And then it goes up onto your CLI, or it creates a file, or shoots it off to S3, whatever you decided to do. Because a lot of the heavy lifting here is actually in these settings. So if we look at the settings file, we have the new output settings. This is really just from my code. Nobody has to do it like this. But we start with, basically, you create the input output settings from the library. Also, you may have noticed that while I called the library go output, I actually always refer to it as format because my naming is terrible. I use, is everybody here familiar with Vital, the configuration tool? It's basically a module that allows you to provide config as either arguments to your command or as a YAML file, JSON file, or TOML file, whatever. It's quite nice. And the stuff here with config, get lowercase string and stuff like that, it's really just some helpful functions for me to make it slightly easier to get that information. So I check, yeah, I want to use emoji or not. It should always be set to true, but you know. What do you want to do with formats? Do you want to write it to a file? Should it append to the file or just recreate the file? Things like that. And then the last one here is around the tables. How wide should the table columns be? What kind of style do you want to use? I've got a bunch of styles, mostly because the library I decided to use for this had like 20 different styles of table. And yeah, why not make them available? So that's all nice. But again, we're talking here, I want to go a little bit deeper. I want to see what it actually does under the hood, how it works, because that's the fun part. It means you will get to heckle me. So again, warning, a lot of this is pressure-driven development. I welcome feedback. And with that, let's get into it. So Go output is a mixture of existing modules that I import or have copied parts of when they were useful, things I hacked together, and one or two things that I actually thought properly about. It's probably in this order of how much is what. But looking at the code, I hope it's slightly readable. I should have probably increased the volume a bit, the font size. So this is add to buffer. I didn't mention this one earlier, but basically you can, instead of directly writing, you can also just add to a buffer and then write once you have everything completed. This makes sense in certain use cases where I needed it. Can't remember which ones they were, but they were important. You can also see here our stuff. Some of these, I don't know why that's commented out. I didn't dare to uncomment it before this, just in case it broke stuff. But I'm sure it's all good. So basically, this just uses a buffer, gets everything there. The only reason I mention this is because in the actual write function, it will always check, hey, is there a buffer? If there's a buffer, then we use that. So here you can see the if we had the output format set to CSV, we'll use the output to CSV function for the result. Otherwise, we just get it from the buffer, because the buffer would have already have it in CSV format. And then we've got things like this HTML here, where for some reason I just printed directly, skip all the rest of the nice code that can be tested, and just go wild. This is on my list of fixing someday, probably after I give a talk about it. If we then look at the code itself of these individual things, some of them are very simple, like probably all done JSON marshalling. YAML is not much more. That's why it was easy to implement. For the CSV, I use a table module. I can't recall the name, but it's something like, something table. It works well. It does exactly what I need. Prints it. It can print CSV, ASCII tables, Markdown tables, HTML tables, all the stuff that I actually wanted. Although you can see there on your left, right, for the audience looking, I use a build table function, which does all of this heavy lifting, and this has a lot of ugly hacks in there, just because the module didn't quite do what I wanted. It printed the wrong Markdown headers. It doesn't really know how to deal with it if I want to use, if I want to write it to S3. So this is what I meant by a user module, and then I hacked around it a bit until it worked. And then I step away and pretend that it's all working and will forever work properly. Now, then print byte slice is the other thing that really does the hard work. It's not too hard, to be honest. So you call it, you give it the parameters, and it sends stuff. So either to an S3 bucket, to your standard out, or it creates or appends to a file. Actually, it might just create a file. So I think my way of appending in places is literally get the contents of the existing file and mash it all together. And there's actually a good reason for this, because I don't want to have the same headers multiple times inside a thing. Or if I output it as JSON, I want it as one JSON file instead of multiple JSON things. So one example for why I use this, I'm sorry, this is AWS again. If you have multiple AWS accounts and I need to gather information from the multiple accounts, that all has to be done in multiple calls. So using the append functionality and then mushing it all together into something that works well means that I can actually have a single view, whether it's a JSON or whether it is a diagram or things like that, without having to do any extra work. It meant work that I did once and never have to do again, which is the best kind of work. Going a bit deeper, this is a part that I actually was quite happy with when I wrote it whenever Go Embed came out. Does anybody remember when that was? Yeah, several years ago, at least. Basically, what I do here is I embed a giant JSON file, and basically, this is the whole library around the shapes. So I can call a shape, say EC2 instance types, let's see, one that is at least sort of modern, a C6G instance, and it will give me the icon for that instance type, which means I don't constantly have to update this code. All I have to do is update that JSON file, for which I have a incredibly ugly bash script that I'm not going to force anybody to look at, because it basically looks at the draw.io GitHub repo, pulls down one of the node files, meshes that a bit up, runs it, but instead of doing things that it would usually do, it will print out stuff and put it in that file, which breaks every couple of months when they make changes, and at some point I stop updating it. What I had to do? Add error handling for unfound shapes. I should probably get around to doing that at some point. But yeah, so originally, before Go Embed was a thing, I really did have that whole JSON file basically as constants in a Go file, and it was horrible. That's not something, if you haven't tried Go Embed, this is the one use case I've had so far where it was really useful, and I highly recommend using it if you have a use case like this. Otherwise, there might be a little bit too much magic going on, because it's literally just magically get all this data from somewhere. But that's cool. So time-wise, let's have a quick look at what I want to do with this, and then after that, you can tell me whether you want to have a quick look at some things, a demo, or if you want to ask questions, things like that. We've got a couple minutes. So first, what will the future bring? I actually want to make it able to print out JPEGs or PNGs or something like that for graphs. I actually realized, again, while doing this, that I have a project somewhere that I did for other things that prints out pie charts and stuff as JPEGs or PNGs, one or the other. So I can probably just copy that code in here and suddenly I'm all happy. Documentation, I want to do code cleanups, fixes, and a lot of cool but useful stuff, cool but useless stuff. So I'm sure that most of you will understand what I will actually be working on, unless somebody forces me to do a presentation about it. So undoubtedly, more cool and useless stuff will show up. Documentation, maybe someday. So, I've got a couple of minutes. Do people want to ask questions? Do you want me to show you some more of the code? Or what is your preference? Don't all shout at once. I can do a demo. Let me, oh, not that one. Yep. Oh, that actually went where I wanted it to go, but it's not. Cool. Let me make this bigger. Cool. So, a demo. This account, let me just check that. Oh, hold on, let me just fix the thing. It went to this weird QWERTY layout. Cool. Quick check that everything works. Cool. So, one thing I can do, it's the one I showed earlier, but basically, say I want a list of my S3 buckets as JSON, but a little bit nicer with passing it through JQ. It shows it like this. It actually doesn't work with the emoji stuff because I didn't put that in the JSON thing. Of course, if we then decide, hey, give it as YAML, then we get the same information as YAML. As a table, the emoji stuff does work. We get it like that. All those pluses just mean this is a demo account and I didn't care too much about the security. So also, obviously, this is zoomed in, so that's why it looks terrible. On a regular size, it doesn't look that bad. Another one I can show you. Oh, that's not the one. So it's the other tool. Nothing. That's kind of useless. Oh, where are we? In the wrong directory. So say I want to deploy a wonderful bucket, and I use a template called, now did I use the wrong name? See, this is, where am I? Oh, examples. Here. That one, fail S3. So this is all using, every step here is using Go outputs to show what it's showing. Including, like, do you want to continue? Yes, no. This is what it's going to do. It's going to create an S3 bucket for me. I said, yes, please continue. I trust it. This is all great and wonderful. And then you can see in red, bright red, hey, stuff went wrong. Please look at the error message. It turns out that somebody in the world already came up with the idea to have an S3 bucket called demo bucket. It's not fair. I thought I was original when I created that. Other than that, it just creates this. And the other thing, let me just have a quick look. Oh, that's the wrong one, thank you. I think I have at least one stack in here. Just the name, that one. So, log reports, that's created in HTML. Demo.html. Stack name is log reports, and we just immediately open demo.html. Cool. Let's open that in a browser. And then you can see it just created this for us. Tables, emojis, graphs, all the fun stuff. So one project I did that I've given talks about is actually doing this, but then in a completely automated way, so that anytime somebody deploys some CloudFormation in their account or any of their accounts, it will update a static website, which is really cool, but again, I promise not to talk too much about AWS. So, too late, thank you. So I just don't know when to shut up. And I think I will leave it at that and go back to my talk whenever I can get my mouse back to go on the wrong side. Here. That's all. If somebody has questions. Thank you. No, never.
2 years and 2 months was going, but I thought it was nowhere near as long.
Yeah.
2 years.
Well, then I touched that bit of code more than 2 years ago. Mark, you might want to turn on the mics.
Sorry if I got distracted by something not really related to your talk, but how much effort did you put into your prompt for your show?
Quite a bit. It is in part Starship and then some extra modules and stuff like that, yeah. And it's changed many times over the years, just like anybody who customizes the prompt is very familiar with. No other questions?
I guess any other questions that you might have, maybe we can catch up with Arjen